I'm the director for the Division of Enforcement for DEQ, and I've been asked to provide a presentation that I hope will be informative about the Dan River spill and also about the consent and special order that we're proposing to you today. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go over the background, a little bit of history of the spill, and also provide some activities that occurred during the spill response period, as well as enforcement activities. Some of those are currently ongoing, and restoration efforts that are ongoing with the Natural Resource Trustee Council, and of course we'll talk about public comments as well. Okay, so a little bit of background. In the early hours of February 2nd, as you know, there was a 40-inch stormwater pipe that was running underneath one of two coal ash impoundments at the Dan River facility that collapsed under pressure. And it released approximately 30 to 39,000 tons of ash, along with 24 to 27 million gallons of impoundment water into the Dan River, extending approximately 75 miles down to the curb where effects were observed. A health advisory was issued by VDH for contact with the sediment at that time. Along with that advisory, they indicated that just washing your hands off would be just fine. I'll note also that this particular area is subject to an existing VDH health advisory for PCBs and mercury. Fish consumption is the concern there. And in addition, what happened is there was enhanced treatment and the Danville and South Boston treatment plants to remove coal ash fines from the water. What I wanted to do is just give you a graphic so that you can put a little bit of perspective on it. If you look on the left-hand side, that's where the station is. That yellow line extending from the station toward the Dan River is where the 48-inch stormwater pipe is. There's a little red X there. That's the approximate location of the collapse, and then at the end of that line you'll see where the outfall is, and that's where the release occurred. Going downstream is actually going to the right as you leave the graphic. Give you a little bit of a regional perspective here as well. Looking down on the left-hand side of the graphic, that's where the station is. It's about 12 miles to get to the Virginia border from there, and about 27 miles to get up to Danville there on the right-hand side of the screen, and then about 75 miles to get to the headwaters of the Kerr Reservoir. So many of the larger spill responses get quite complicated to deal with. There are a lot of emergency measures that are taken right away, but they've got to coordinate the effort, which was quite difficult in this particular case because you had several jurisdictions involved. You had North Carolina, you had Virginia, you had Region 4 for North Carolina, you had Region 3 for Virginia, and then Fish and Wildlife Service and some of the other agencies that get involved in these matters. So an administrative order on consent tries to pool all that effort and tries to direct the cleanup and remediation efforts. One was entered into in this case. It was a combined federal and state response, and you can look at the bottom there. It's kind of hard to see from my perspective. But the four key areas were surface water, drinking water, and sediment assessment at the time of the spill, and then also long-term monitoring, which is continuing to occur. The second area was removal and management of coal ash from the Dan River. I'll discuss a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then regular reporting on the response activities and the effectiveness of those activities, and then an engineering report on the integrity of the impoundments and stormwater lines. I'll talk a little bit more about that because the stormwater line was plugged. The AOC represents, again, that combined effort between all the different jurisdictions. DEQ's involvement was focused primarily on the response and how it affects local communities here in Virginia, as well as our continued involvement when it comes to things like the long-term monitoring. So the effect of that AOC was the plugging of that 48-inch stormwater pipe. In addition, there was a 36-inch stormwater pipe that was discovered that was plugged in the process. Also, the impoundments that are the subject of this that you saw in that previous image are subject to being closed. The other thing I would share is that there were 3 coal units at one time at the Dam River Station. They were in the process of being closed at the time of the spill and being torn down. Those 3 coal units have been replaced with a natural gas unit. So the AOC also requires the assessment and long-term monitoring of the river system, as I've indicated. The data that continues to be collected is going to inform DEQ as well as the localities on any additional concerns about public health. Importantly, it's also going to inform the decision process on natural resource damage. I mentioned when we opened up, there's a Natural Resource Trustee Council that's currently looking specifically at NRD and evaluating what the injury is to the river. There's a whole process surrounding that and that effort, and I'm going to provide a slide on that so that we can talk a little bit more in detail on that. Right now, the monitoring period looks like it's going to be approximately 3 to 5 years, depending on the quality of the data that we obtained and the confidence that we have in it. Okay, so I wanted to put this graphic up just to give you a sense of what that monitoring effort looks like. We began monitoring 2 months after the spill occurred. Monitoring occurred in April 2014. We're sampling at 12 river and lake stations, water column and sediment sampling at 4 river sites and 2 lake sites, benthic sampling at 2 river sites, and fish collection at 8 sites. North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources, as well as Duke, are doing some of their own monitoring. I'll also note that the Dan River Basin is providing some citizen monitoring for benthics. A lot of people ask, how much is all this costing? Okay, here's what we know so far. And these are ongoing costs, okay? Currently, the Commonwealth, and that includes all the agencies that you see up there, has collected $213,000. Okay, that represents updated costs. Duke has been very cooperative with us very early on in this process to establish an agreement that gets us that reimbursement as quickly as possible. Region 3 reports in at 1.07, Region 4 reports in at 1.54, and those are first quarter 2015 costs, and Duke has reported $20 million in expenses so far. So moving into the consent special order that is being proposed to you, the enforcement action represents the 3rd largest enforcement action in the agency's history. So it's not insignificant, and there's been quite a bit of effort that's gone behind it. When you break it down, it's a $2.5 million settlement. $250,000 of that goes to the VERF, and then $2.25 million goes into environmental projects that are to be directed toward the affected communities. If you look at the appendix, we tried to do something somewhat unique for enforcement. The appendix is actually a list of projects that we have that the stakeholders and those communities already have value for. It ties in also to the work the Natural Resource Trustee Council is doing, and there's a robust stakeholder effort there. So those projects that you're looking at, we know have already been vetted to some extent by the local communities. So if we can tie into those, we think that's a good thing. The second item that you see there is additional projects that meet criteria to improve water quality, enhance habitat, and expand recreational use of the river. So that's designed to capture additional projects, basically open the door to as much as we possibly can to those affected communities. We also added in the possibility of projects in the fish advisory area for PCB and mercuries. We know that there's ongoing concern about that advisory and how that affects the overall economic situation of the area. And then lastly, we look at projects on a case-by-case basis. That's just opening the door as wide as we possibly can to accept as many projects as we can. To the extent that some of these efforts are underway by the Natural Resource Trustee Council, and some of those projects, I think there's about 26 out there right now that are part of that group, that some of those are left on the table, that there's not money there to pay for them. the consent special order potentially could be another funding source for additional projects. And that was the design of it. The other thing that the order attempts to do is to preclude double crediting. We received comments that, for example, our Grogan Park, which was initially in the appendix, shouldn't be credited because it was already paid for. That project was taken off the list. There was a second project, a $250,000 grant to the Riverbanks Fund, which is administered by the Community Foundation of the Dan River region, that was taken off as well. So we think, at least up front, we had taken all that potential double counting off the table. And we also have sections of the consent special order that try to preclude that from happening as well. My discussions with our Duke colleagues indicate their willingness also to put together a spreadsheet that shows all these different funding sources for projects, and then identify what projects are going through what funding mechanism, whether it's the trustee council or the consent order, or maybe even the plea agreement with Justice. So we try to also address the double counting issue. I'll hit on the Commonwealth Cost Recovery Group one more time. I had indicated that right now we're up to date on cost recovery for Virginia agencies. Early on in the process, we reached out to Duke to try to recover our costs as quickly as possible. Oftentimes in our consent orders, you see a cost recovery section in there. You don't see one here because we don't think we need one, since we already have a process in place that gets money back to the agencies that have spent money on the response effort as quickly as possible. If we would have waited up until now, basically we've been waiting over a year to get the money back to the agencies and the localities. I did put a note on there for unaccounted costs. There's one locality, and there's probably, I think, one agency that is not part of the Commonwealth Cost Recovery Group. They chose to have their own agreements with Duke. But I think this effort was coordinated pretty well and has been pretty effective. In the media, there's been a lot of attention on the Department of Justice's plea agreement to resolve 9 misdemeanor violations of the Clean Water Act up in North Carolina. The facts of this, I think, have been somewhat confused in some public forums because they think it's all about the Dan River and that spill, when that is not the case. Of the 9 total charges for the misdemeanors in that plea agreement are associated with the Dan River spill. It covers violations also at the Cape Fear Steam Electric Plant in Moncure, North Carolina, the Riverbend Steam Station in Mount Holly, North Carolina, the H.F. Lee Steam Electric Plant in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and the Asheville Steam Electric General Plant in Asheville. And I would note that the violations primarily are concerning point source discharges and maintenance failures at those facilities. There's a total of roughly $102 million. 68.2 million is going to end up in the Treasury for the United States, since it's a Department of Justice action. And then when you break down the 34 million in CSPs, those are community service projects, again going back to projects for the area. 10 million will be for the purchase of wetlands or riparian lands to offset impacts from the ash impoundments around North Carolina. 24 million administered by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for riparian ecosystem projects in both North Carolina and Virginia. And then 3 million is specifically dedicated to Virginia. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is required to coordinate with DEQ, DGIF, and DCR in trying to get these projects on the ground for Virginia. They've already